Welcome. In this lesson, we're creating a simple random number guessing game where the objective is that the user has to come in, they see a range that they need to make the random guess of a number, and then they get feedback. So right now, guess a number from 1 to 14. This is the user's guess, so it's by default it's 7, and let's see how 7 goes. So now it says too high, guess a number from 1 to 6. So we know that the number is lower than 7. We're guessing 1 to 6. So let's try 4. Now we've got still too high, guess a number from 1 to 3. Still too high, guess a number from 1 to 2. And it looks like we need to guess 1. So it took us 5 guesses in order to guess it correct. And then it gives us the feedback there, how many guesses it took, what the correct answer was, and gives us the ability to restart the game again. And then we can go through the guessing process once again in order to make the complete guess. On the left-hand side, I have the editor open with an HTML file. Within the HTML file, there's several different page elements. There's a div for the output content. So this is where we're going to communicate information using JavaScript code back to the web user that's interacting with the web application. There's also another div that we've given a class of box. So this is where we're wrapping the input as well as the button. So currently for the HTML output, there's an input field and a button. So we're going to make all of these clickable and get the input value from JavaScript. And this is linked to a file that I've created called app3.js. Right now, app3.js is empty, and we're running the browser on the right-hand side so we can see the updates. We've also got the DevTools console from Chrome open down at the bottom right-hand side so we can see the interaction. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to select the page elements. So we want to select the element with a class of output, and this is going to be where our output content is. So give it a variable name, and then using the document query selector, select the element with a class of output. And also we need to select the my input value, and we only just have the one input, so we can use the query selector, and using the selector we can select just the input field. If there's more than one input field on the page, you can also use the parent, which is the class of box. So in order to be more specific, in case we add additional input fields to our HTML, then we can select it this way. We also want to select the button. So I'm just going to give this a variable name of btn and select the element with the class of box, with the parent class of box, and selecting the button. So what we want to do is we want to make the button clickable. So adding an event listener, so you can add the on-click event, or you can add the event listener and add the click event to it. And when it gets clicked, what we'll do is we'll run a function that will start the number guessing game. And we'll just give this function a name of start, and then create this function as a placeholder. So whenever the button gets clicked, we're going to run the start function. And within here right now, we're just going to output the word ready. So click the button, we've got the output of ready. So when the button gets clicked, the add event listener fires on the click event and runs the function with the name of start. So we also want to get the input values from the user that they've set. So we'll grab the input value, so whatever that currently is, and output that into the console. So now whenever we get a number, we can see that we're getting that added in. I also want to select the my input and set the attribute and set the type as number. So that will change the input type field to a number. So we've got the numbers there going up and down. You can also, for number input fields, you can set attributes such as minimum and maximum. So the minimum number that we want to allow is going to be 0. So when we go down, minimum will be 0. You can also take a closer look at the HTML. So this is just adding in the HTML elements into the attributes. So setting the input type as number and the minimum. Let's also add a maximum attribute. And of course, you can do this with HTML as well. So selecting the maximum attribute of 100. So that will shrink the input field and allow us to only go up to the value of 100. Let's resize that back down. And we're going to create an object. So we're going to create an object called game. And within the game object, we can have values for minimum and then also values for maximum. So this will allow us to be more dynamic when we're setting the attributes for the element. And we can use the dynamic values for game minimum and game maximum. So that will allow us to make updates, and it will also allow us to update the gameplay. So if we wanted to set it to a maximum of 10, now the maximum value that is within the input area is going to be 10. And this is just dynamically changing as we're setting the attributes for the game. So what we want to do is we want to pick up the value that's there. So we want to set a random value. And right now this random value will be 0. And when we start the gameplay, we want to generate a random value that we can use for the gameplay. So we're going to use the math function. And we're going to create a function in order to manage and return back a random number. So make random number. And the random values that we're going to be adding in here, so we're going to have a minimum random value and a maximum random value. And it's just going to simply be returning back the result from using the math floor. And within the math floor, we want to set a math random, and we want those random numbers to be a minimum and to use the minimum and the maximum. So let's multiply it by the value that we have for max. And the reason that I'm adding in the other bracket is that this will return back a value, whatever the max value is, and we don't have a minimum value set in it right now. So in order to do a little experiment, you can create a loop. So looping I while I is less than 100. And then from here, we can loop it through 100 times and we'll output the result into the console. So within the console log, we'll pass in a whatever the return value is for make random. And right now for the minimum, let's set the minimum as 1. And we'll set the maximum as 10. And we'll see what type of results we get back here. So that gives us a whole bunch of results there. So what we want to do is we want to set the minimum, and we're not getting the maximum yet because we need to add 1 to the maximum. So let's go ahead and we're going to add 1 to it. So we want to subtract the minimum and then add the 1 to it. And we'll see what happens now. So now we're still getting those values of 0 all the way to 9 because we're not passing in the minimum value. We're not making use of it right now. So what we need to still do is add the minimum value to it. And now we should have a spread for the numbers. So we're getting a value of 1 there as the minimum and 10 as the maximum. So this is a way to create a function that's going to return back a minimum and a maximum number, including those minimum and maximum numbers. So it includes 1, it includes 10, and also the numbers in between. So let's go ahead and we'll comment that out because we're not going to need that function anymore. So we've been able to prove that we're returning back a random number from 1 to 10. And let's go ahead and we'll generate the random number here as we're creating the game. And now when we open up the game object, we can see we've got a random number. So what we want is we want the user to be able to guess the random number. And let's take we'll add a value for the my input. So this is just a default value that we can have as a starting value. And what we'll do is we'll take the math floor value. And this will be a value of the game max divided by 2. And that should be game max divided by 2. So that gives us roughly the center number from the spread. And again, this is going to be dynamically coming from the game object. And there we've got the number. So what we want to happen is when we press the start button, that we take the value that we have there and we check to see if this value is going to be higher or lower. Let's also create a function, and we'll just call this message, and whatever we want to output into the output area. So this will give us a way to update the inner HTML of the output area to be whatever we've got for value. So when we start the gameplay, we'll just have some instructions for the user. Guess a number from, and I'm going to use this as a template literal, so those are the backticks. That's the key to the left of the 1 on most keyboards, and that will allow me to a lot easier include the game minimum and the game maximum values. So all within the same string value. So we get guess a number from 0 to 10, and actually we'll set the minimum to 1. So that way it dynamically changes, guess a number from 1 to 10. And once we hit the check, we're getting the value that we have within the input. So now let's use that and compare that to the value of the random number. And then we'll issue a response back to the user depending on what the result is. So first we'll check to see if the my input value, and I'm going to set this as a variable. So that way it's a little bit easier to track and manage. We don't have to keep putting my input value. And that way we can also clear whatever the input value is. So we can just set it to just blank. And we check to see if val is equal to, and we're getting the game random number. And if it is equal to the random number, then within the console, we'll just write correct. And let's check to see what the random number is. So it's 8. So when we guess it correct, we should see correct there within the console. We'll add in an else if. So we'll check to see if val is less than the game random. And if it is, then we can run this action. And we'll just output too low. And then afterwards, we can set these to the user. And if it's not correct, and if it's not too low, then that means that it's too high. So there's only the 3 options there. So right now the guess was too high, and maybe we shouldn't clear out the number that was guessed. So right now it's too high, correct. So the correct answer was 4. And if we go lower, it's going to say too low. So this is giving us some guidance on what we can expect from the output. And now let's take these values and we're going to output it into the message area. So that's going to be where the game ends. So we'll just write the game over and we'll manage that. And so if they've guessed it too low, then we can update what we're outputting here, because we know that the guess is too low. So they need to guess a value from to whatever the max is. So let's update that and set this up as a template literal. So once again, using the backticks for the left of the 1 on the keyboard. And we'll set the value of val and then add in the message. And then this is going to be going to the game max. Let's use the number constructor to convert this into the string value of the my input, as it's coming back as a string. So it's coming from an input area, and you can wrap it with the number object. So this will turn it into a number and allow us to add 1 to it. So let's see if that worked. So we're able to guess a number from 6 to 10, 7 to 10, 8 to 10, 9 to 10, and correct. You got it correct. So that was the correct number that we had within the game object, and the random number once again was 9. So that's where we're able to get it correct. And we'll do the same. So if we guess too high, we want to update this and set that to be the message that it's too high. And you can update the messaging as needed for the user. So what we're going to take is the value of the game minimum, and the range will be going from the game minimum to whatever we've got as the current value. So just updating where the order of these is, and we need to guess a number that's lower. So we're going to subtract 1 from val. So let's see how that goes. So too high, guess a number from 1 to 4. Correct, we got it. If we're too low, then that's going to give us the other message that we're too low, so guess a number from 4 to 10. So it's always going to include the actual active number that's going to be set as the random number. And you can also update the message area, so we can set that to various colors if we want. So where we've got the message output, let's add in one other parameter there. The first one's going to be the string, and the second one will be the font color. So here we're setting it, and you got it correct. So just set it to black if it's correct. If the incorrect, then we'll set it to red. Or actually we'll set it to green if it's correct. And if it's once here as well, it can be red. And you can also change the colors that it's going to be. So this is just going to be the font color. So I'll just call it font C. Select the output element, update its style, and set the color, or we can set even the background color. So whichever one you want to set, and this is just going to be set whatever we've got for the string there. So too low, equal to 10. So if those are going to be equal, then we can update the message, and I'll just call it V. Is this a ternary operator? Then that's just going to be blank. Otherwise, we'll set the value there. And this is again wrapped with the single back tick. Update that so we can have the value there within the rounded curly brackets for V. And we'll set that as well for the game. And this is going to be checking to see if the val plus 1 is equal to the game max, and if it is, and this should actually be condition, so just update that to be a condition, and then we'll have the output. Instead of that, it'll just have whatever we've got the value for V. So let's try that, and everything seems to be working. You got it correct. Let's change the range. So we'll change the range from 8 to 10. And this should actually be making the random number from the minimum and maximum. So let's just make a quick update to that. So we need to be using the content within the game for game minimum and game maximum. So that way it's going to be fully dynamic. And then this floor, this should also be giving us a range. So it looks like that one also is, we're having some issues with that. So let's divide it by the game minimum. So it's coming in as 4, and we should add the game minimum to it. So that will give us the center number. Let's try that again. We'll update it to minimum of 8. So that gives us the center number there. Guess is too high. Too high of a guess. So this one is the one that's responding if the random is 8. So this one is going to be the response there. Guess too high, guess a number, and we shouldn't even include the from, and it'll just say guess a number. So too low, guess a number. Let's check what the value is. So it's 10. So we're not outputting the 10. Here it's if it's too low and it's not going to be only the one value, we are going to see the 9 to 10. So that provides more advanced messaging back to the user. So once we get it correct, we want to generate a new number back to the user. So let's create a function, and I'll create a function that's going to be called start fun. So this is where we're going to be generating the random number, updating the message, and doing all of the stuff we had within these functions. So this is just going to simply run whenever the game starts, and we can run this function again to reset everything there that we have for the game. So when they do get it correct, let's update the button text, and we'll update the text content. And this will just say restart. And we can also hide the my input. So set that to display. So now we've got the game over. It says restart. And when we have the start function, we can set a condition on that. And we'll create a separate one, button clicked function. And here we can, instead of checking to see running for the start, we'll run button clicked. And here we can check to see what the value of the button is. So we'll have a condition if button text content equals restart, then we restart the game, and that will run the start fun. Else we can run the start function. And you can obviously rename that if the need is there. So guess a random number from 8 to 10. You got it correct, and then we restart it. So that will give us a way to check for a restart. This is also should be style display. So set the style display to none. So see what happens. Number is too high. So game over. So we're also hiding the guess option there. Let's set that as a span. So it's going to be the span just before the input. So we want to hide that as well. So add that in, span label, and using the document and query selector, select the element with a class of box and any of the spans that are in. We're going to just have the one span. So this one as well, we're going to be setting the display property to none. And of course you can customize this as needed. So just setting the display to be none. So now we've got correct, you got it. And I'll also update this message to confirm the number, whatever the random number. And this is still creating the string at the template. And then here is where we can set the game random number. Correct, you got it. It was 9, game over. So we restart. And now we need to show these again. So add that into the start function there. So display none, and this will just be inline. And this can also be inline. So that gives us our options there again. And we can even make it more dynamic by setting a random number, or we can update the game minimum and maximum. So when we restart, we can set the game. So get the game minimum, and using the random value there where we have the random maker. So whatever we want as a minimum and a maximum value. So the minimum usually should be fairly small. So maybe we can always keep the minimum at 1 and game max. And you can set this to random. So make a random number. So how about we set a minimum of 10, and then the max can be 100. So this will give us a different span range. So right now guess a number from 1 to 60. Too high, so let's try a lower number. Let's see what the number is. So the number looks like it's 8. Correct, you got it. It was 8, game over. We restart. Now we're guessing a number from 1 to 73. So this will allow for a continued gameplay. You can also set the guesses value, and then once we restart, guesses equal that to 0, and every time they make a guess, we can increment it by 1. And then here we can say the number of guesses. And this is just more details that you can provide for the user. So it took you whatever guesses. And then play through it several times just to make sure that the functionality is just as you'd expect it. So correct, you got it. It was 55. It took 4 guesses to do that. And maybe we don't even need the game over there. So again, you can customize the message as needed so you can output it to the user. And you can also change that, the minimums and the maximums. So this will dynamically change the gameplay for the user. So go ahead and try it out, create your own version of the game in order to learn more about what you can do with Math Random and how you can randomize your gameplay, making a simple number guessing game with JavaScript. We also need to update the value for the button. So we did update the button to restart. So once we do initiate the restart, so if it is restart, then we'll update the button text and set that to guess. We can also do that within the start function. So this is updating that to say guess. So just make sure that it is working properly. And correct, it took 7 guesses. Restart, so we can do the full guessing again and it restarts the game properly.